Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time, where the human heart echoes across centuries with the same intensity as always. Today, we're going to dive into a story of love, dignity, and rebirth that teaches us that even in the most majestic palaces, it's the simplest gestures that transform destinies. This is the story of Catherine Hartwell, a young woman who discovered that true nobility isn't inherited but earned through courage and kindness. It's a narrative that shows us how a child can change the course of history with a simple bouquet of flowers, and how true love can blossom even amidst the fiercest storms of politics and prejudice. I'd like to know, where are you joining us from on this journey? Tell me your city in the comments, and if this story touches your heart as it has mine, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps me immensely to continue bringing these literary gems to you. Now close your eyes and imagine with me. Year 1839, Kingdom of Baelsmer, Raven's Hollow Palace. The winter of 1839 settled over the Kingdom of Baelsmer like a cloak of mourning that was never lifted. For 4 years, since the epidemic had taken Queen Charlotte, Raven's Hollow Palace breathed a thin air, where footsteps echoed with excessive reverence through the white marble corridors. King William of Baelsmer, at 32 years old, carried on his shoulders not only the crown of gold and sapphires, but the weight of a kingdom waiting for a decision, a choice, a sign that life could once again flourish within those walls where time seemed to have stopped, the exact moment Charlotte had closed her eyes for the last time. On that December morning, as the first snowflakes danced lazily beyond the crystal windows, the Royal Council met in the Chamber of Whispers. Lord Thomas Ashford, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes as shrewd as a hawk's, bowed respectfully before the empty throne. "Your Majesty," his voice echoed through the dark blue velvet-lined walls, "the kingdom needs stability, a queen, an heir. The future of the Baelsmer dynasty cannot remain in suspense." William remained silent, his long, pale fingers distractedly tracing the royal crest carved into the arm of the chair. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on his face, marked by a melancholy that seemed to have become part of his very skin. "There are ladies of excellent lineage," Lord Ashford continued. "The Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield has shown interest, as has Lady Margaret of Somerset. And Victoria?" The king's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "Where is my daughter in this equation of political conveniences?" An awkward silence filled the chamber. Princess Victoria, at 7 years old, was a child with bright blue eyes and hair as golden as summer wheat fields. Since her mother's death, she had become even more precious in her father's eyes, the only light that could still pierce the shadows of his grief. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," murmured Lord Edmund Blackwood, adjusting his glasses on his aquiline nose, "a child cannot comprehend the complexities of a royal union." William slowly rose, his navy blue velvet cape rustling against the marble floor. He approached the window overlooking the snow-covered gardens, where Charlotte had once cultivated white roses that perfumed the entire palace during the summer. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low but filled with a determination that made all the councillors straighten their backs, "that is exactly why she must choose. A child sees with the heart, not with calculation." The declaration echoed through the room like the toll of a bell. Lord Ashford swallowed hard, his carefully orchestrated plans beginning to crumble like a house of cards. "Your Majesty, what exactly are you proposing?" William turned back, and for the first time in months, a hint of a smile touched his lips. It was a melancholy smile, but there was a spark of something long lost in it, hope. "I will summon all the unmarried ladies of the nobility for a ceremony. Victoria will choose from among them the one who inspires her trust to be her new mother, and whoever she chooses, I will marry." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a decision so unexpected, so outside of any known protocol, that for a few moments the most powerful men in the kingdom were as mute as statues. But in William's eyes was an iron determination. He had found a way to honor both his duty as king and his love as a father. And maybe, just maybe, Charlotte was whispering in his ears that true love always finds a way, even through the most rigid conventions. As the snow began to fall more heavily that afternoon, it was as if the sky itself was anticipating the changes to come. Spring arrived in the Kingdom of Baelsmer, carried on the winds with the scent of wild violets that bloomed among the castle stones. April of 1839 brought not only the awakening of nature, but also the day that would forever change the kingdom's destiny. In the great throne hall, crystal chandeliers cast thousands of tiny rainbows onto the ladies of the nobility, who were lined up in their most elegant gowns. French silks rustled against the polished marble, family jewels glittered under the golden light, and the air was thick with the tension of anticipation. Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield occupied a prominent position, her tall silhouette wrapped in a burgundy dress that highlighted her hair, which was as black as night. At 35, a widow and ambitious, she had carefully cultivated her image as the perfect candidate. Noble, experienced, politically connected, her smile was calculated like a mathematical equation, and her dark eyes shone with the certainty of victory. Beside her were other ladies of equal importance. Lady Margaret of Somerset, with her inherited pearls and impeccable posture. Lady Elizabeth of Wyndham, young and beautiful as a porcelain doll. Lady Cornelia of Blackthorn, whose family owned the largest tracts of land in the kingdom. And then, almost hidden among the ladies in waiting, was Catherine Hartwell, 22 years old, with golden brown hair that caught the light like threads of honey, and green eyes as serene as mountain lakes. Her dress was simple, a light blue without embroidery or expensive adornments, but it highlighted the natural delicacy of her features. She wasn't there as a candidate, but as a companion to Lady Somerset, a position that made her practically invisible to the court's eyes. Catherine kept her hands clasped in front of her body, her fingers intertwined in a silent prayer, not for the possibility of being chosen, that had never crossed her mind, but for the child who would soon enter that hall, carrying the weight of a decision that would determine not only her future, but that of an entire kingdom. The sound of trumpets echoed through the Gothic arches. King William entered the hall with a solemn step, the crown glinting on his dark hair, the royal mantle trailing majestically on the red carpet. But all eyes turned to the small figure at his side. Princess Victoria walked with the dignity of a queen, despite being only 7 years old. Her golden hair had been carefully braided with blue ribbons, and she wore a white dress embroidered with golden fleur-de-lis. In her small hands, she carried a bouquet of white violets, her late mother's favorite flowers. The silence in the hall was absolute. 200 people held their breath as the girl walked slowly between the rows of ladies, her blue eyes studying each face with a seriousness that contrasted with her age. Evangeline straightened her shoulders, her smile becoming even more radiant. Lady Margaret discreetly adjusted her pearl necklace. Lady Elizabeth timidly lowered her eyes, in the pose she judged most charming, but Victoria kept walking. She passed Evangeline without even a pause. She ignored Lady Margaret and her perfect posture. She didn't even look at Lady Elizabeth and her delicate beauty. Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine when she realized the girl had stopped right in front of her. Catherine's heart pounded so hard she feared everyone in the hall could hear it. Victoria looked up at her, her green eyes so similar to Catherine's, and for a moment that seemed eternal, the two contemplated each other in silence. There was an ancient wisdom in the child's expression, as if she could see through appearances and reach directly into the soul. Then, without a word, Victoria held out the bouquet of white violets. Catherine looked at the flowers, then at the girl, then at the king, who was watching the scene with an indescribable expression. Her hands trembled as she accepted the bouquet, and she could feel the soft scent of the violets mixing with the lavender aroma that always accompanied the princess. "Catherine Hartwell," Victoria's clear voice echoed through the silent hall. "I choose you to be my new mother." The effect was as if lightning had struck the center of the hall. Gasps of shock echoed among the nobility. Evangeline paled so much that her jewels seemed to lose their shine. Lord Ashford choked on his own saliva. Scandalized whispers began to spread like ripples in a disturbed lake. Catherine felt her legs weaken. For a moment, the world spun around her, and she feared she would faint right there, in front of the entire court. But then her eyes met King William's. He was walking toward her with firm steps, and on his face was an expression of surprise, yes, but also something she couldn't fully identify. Approval, relief, or could it be something deeper? "Catherine Hartwell," his voice resonated clear and solemn through the hall, "by my daughter's will and my sworn word, I proclaim you my fiancée and future Queen of Baelsmer." Catherine's world completely transformed in that instant. The bouquet of violets in her hands seemed to weigh more than the royal crown itself, and she knew her life of simplicity and anonymity had come to an end. But as the scandal erupted around her like a furious storm, she looked again at Victoria and saw something in the girl's eyes that reassured her. Absolute trust. The child had seen something in her that Catherine herself didn't yet understand. The first days of May brought Catherine Hartwell a reality she never could have imagined. The east wing of Raven's Hollow Palace, with its pink marble chambers and windows overlooking the rose gardens, became her new golden prison. The room assigned to her was magnificent by any standard. French silk fabrics covered the walls, a sky-blue velvet canopy protected the carved oak bed, and Persian rugs as soft as clouds covered the polished marble floor. But Catherine felt like a wild bird, caged in a golden cage. It was during breakfast in the gilded hall that the court's hostility manifested with the most cruelty. The noble ladies had developed a subtle art of humiliation, conversations that abruptly ceased when Catherine approached, glances that swept over her from head to toe with thinly veiled disdain, comments whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "They say she doesn't even know how to use a dessert fork correctly," murmured Lady Cornelia, pretending to examine her lace glove as Catherine passed by. "I heard her clothes had to be completely remade because she didn't know the difference between silk and cotton," added Lady Elizabeth, a venomous smile playing on her rosy lips. Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield had become the conductor of this symphony of cruelty. Her strategy was more sophisticated. She never attacked Catherine directly, but led by example. When Catherine tried to join a conversation, Evangeline would simply turn away and start a topic about family genealogies or ancestral properties, subjects in which Catherine obviously couldn't participate. "My dear Princess Victoria," Evangeline said one sunny afternoon, as the child played on the terrace with her porcelain dolls, "surely you understand that choosing a mother is different from choosing a playmate, isn't it?" Victoria, who at 7 years old already showed a keen intuition, raised her blue eyes to Evangeline. "I didn't choose Catherine to play Duchess. I chose her because she has kind eyes." "Kind eyes," Evangeline repeated, as if tasting sour wine. "How charming. But tell me, little one, do you know that a queen needs much more than kind eyes? She needs to know how to lead, to command, to make difficult decisions about the kingdom." Catherine, who was arranging flowers in a nearby vase, felt every word as a stab, because deep down she knew Evangeline was right. What could she, a simple lady-in-waiting, offer to an entire kingdom? It was during a royal council meeting about the harvest problems that Catherine found her voice. The southern wheat fields had been devastated by a blight, and peasant revolts were beginning to break out in the more distant provinces. Lord Ashford presented grim reports as maps were spread across the polished mahogany table. "The situation is grave, Your Majesty," he said, his fingers tracing the affected trade routes. "If we cannot import grain from France, we will have widespread famine before winter." King William studied the documents intently, his face grave under the golden candlelight. Catherine was only present because Victoria had insisted that her future mother should learn about the kingdom, but she remained silent in a corner of the room, feeling completely out of place. "France will charge us exorbitant prices," murmured Lord Edmund Blackwood. "They know our desperate situation. What if we looked for grain from the northern valleys?" Catherine's soft voice echoed through the room, making all the men turn in surprise. Lord Ashford frowned. "The northern valleys, my lady?" Catherine felt the blood rush to her cheeks, but continued. "When I was a child, my mother often took me to the northern fairs. The valleys of Thornwick and Millbrook have always produced surplus grain, but they only sell locally because they don't have established trade routes to the capital." Absolute silence. Catherine wished the floor would open up and swallow her, but then King William leaned forward. "Continue. If we establish direct routes with these valleys, offering them royal protection and tax exemptions in exchange for their surplus, we could solve our shortage without depending on France. And that would also calm the revolts because we would show that we care about the needs of the common people." The silence stretched for long moments. Catherine could hear her own heart beating furiously. Finally, Lord Ashford cleared his throat. "It's an interesting suggestion. It's a brilliant suggestion," said King William, his eyes meeting Catherine's. "Why didn't we think of that before?" That night, when Catherine was alone in her chambers, she heard a soft knock on her door. Upon opening it, she found Princess Victoria in her nightgown, holding her favorite doll. "Catherine," the girl said, her eyes shining in the soft candlelight, "Daddy said you saved the peasants from starving. You're very clever." Catherine knelt down to be at the child's level. "I just tried to help. That's why I chose you," Victoria whispered, moving in for a hug. "You care about people the way Mama did." As Catherine hugged the child, she felt something strengthening inside her chest. Maybe she really could learn to be the queen Baelsmer needed. Outside in the gardens covered by the night mist, Duchess Evangeline watched the illuminated window with eyes blazing with anger. That little victory of Catherine's would be her last. The winter solstice arrived in the kingdom of Baelsma, wrapped in ancestral traditions and the special magic that only the longest night of the year could bring. The great masked ball was an event awaited by the entire court, a night when identities were hidden behind feathers and silks, and hearts could reveal truths that daylight would never allow. The main ballroom of Ravenshollow Palace had been transformed into a dreamscape. Hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers created a golden, intimate atmosphere, while garlands of ivy and white roses decorated the marble columns. The air was scented with lavender and cinnamon, and a string orchestra filled the room with soft melodies that seemed to float like angels' whispers. Catherine contemplated herself in her bedroom mirror, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Her mask was simple but elegant, silver with delicate pearl designs, framing only her green eyes. The dress she chose was a deep blue like the midnight sky, with a defined waist and a skirt that flowed like water around her legs. There were no expensive jewels, only a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. As she descended the marble staircase toward the hall, Catherine could feel the gazes following her. Even with the mask, her identity was easily recognizable, and she noticed whispers spreading like ripples in a disturbed lake. The hall was bustling with the kingdom's elite. Gentlemen in black velvet tailcoats and elaborate masks conversed in small groups, while ladies in vibrant dresses and masks adorned with exotic feathers moved like exotic flowers in a nocturnal garden. Catherine found a discreet corner near the windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens, where she could observe without being noticed. The music began, a melancholic waltz that invited couples to dance, and then began what she soon realized was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. Gentleman after gentleman approached the nearby ladies, extending a hand in invitations to dance. Lady Margaret was immediately asked by the Count of Westbridge. Lady Elizabeth soon found herself twirling in the arms of Sir Francis Pemberton. Even ladies of lesser importance found their partners quickly. Catherine remained alone in her corner. Minutes passed. The music continued. Couples danced in perfect harmony, and melodious laughter echoed through the hall. Catherine tried to keep a smile on her lips, but she felt a growing tightness in her chest. She knew exactly what was happening. Everyone had been instructed not to invite her to dance. Across the hall, Duchess Evangeline watched the scene with thinly veiled satisfaction. Her golden mask, adorned with black feathers, could not conceal the triumphant gleam in her dark eyes. She had spent weeks whispering venom in the ears of the court's gentlemen. It wouldn't be appropriate to show too much interest in the future queen before the wedding. A respectful attitude would be to keep her at a distance. The king would surely value such a display of decorum. Catherine felt tears sting her eyes. The humiliation was public and deliberate. She could imagine the comments circulating. Look at her standing alone, and not even a mask can hide her inadequacy. What kind of queen will this be who can't even attract a dance partner? That's when the music stopped. An expectant silence filled the hall. Catherine looked up and saw a tall figure approaching her through the crowd. Even with the mask, a magnificent piece in gold and onyx that covered half his face, she immediately recognized his proud posture and dark hair. King William stopped in front of her, and with a deep bow that made the whole hall hold its breath, extended his hand. "My lady, would you grant me the honor of this dance?" Catherine's heart raced so fast she feared she would faint. All conversations ceased. All eyes turned to them. With trembling hands she accepted the invitation. The orchestra began again, a more intense, more passionate waltz. William led her to the center of the hall, and suddenly Catherine found herself dancing in the king's arms in front of the entire court. He danced with natural elegance, his movements sure and graceful. Catherine, who had learned to dance at the humble gatherings of her youth, found that she could follow him perfectly, as if their bodies knew a secret choreography. "You are radiant tonight," he murmured, his voice low, and for her alone. "So, Your Majesty," she began, but he interrupted her. "William," he said softly, "tonight. Just William." They spun in perfect synchrony, Catherine's skirts flowing like blue petals around her legs. Catherine could feel the warmth of his hand on her waist, the gentle strength with which he guided her, the discreet scent of sandalwood and spices that always accompanied him. When the music ended, William did not let go of her immediately. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, they remained like that, eyes locked, breaths intertwined, while the entire hall watched them in absolute silence. Then, to the complete shock of everyone present, the orchestra began a second waltz, and William continued dancing with Catherine. Scandalized whispers echoed from the edges of the hall. It was completely unprecedented. A king dancing 2 consecutive songs with the same lady, especially in public. Evangeline gripped her fan so tightly that Catherine could hear the creak of the ivory even from a distance. But there was more to come. When the second song ended, William still did not let go of her. His eyes met hers through the masks, and Catherine saw something in them that made her heart leap. An intensity, a connection that transcended protocol and political conveniences. The third waltz began. The scandal was now absolute. Dancing 3 consecutive songs with the same partner was a public declaration of romantic interest. It was a gesture that would echo throughout the kingdom before dawn. Catherine felt as if she were floating. The music, the golden candlelight, the scent of the flowers, the strong arms that guided her, everything blended into a symphony of sensations that left her dizzy with happiness. When the third song finally came to an end, William leaned in to whisper in her ear, "Let everyone know that Catherine Hartwell has my complete support and protection." His words were said in a tone that reached the ears of those closest, spreading quickly through the hall like ripples in a pond. That night, when Catherine finally retired to her chambers, she could still feel the echo of the music in her ears and the warmth of William's arms around her. For the first time since she had arrived at the palace, she felt that maybe she belonged in that place. Across the gardens, in a window in the west wing, Evangeline watched the snowflakes fall and planned her next move. If subtle seduction didn't work, perhaps it was time for more direct methods. The beginning of 1840 brought icy winds that howled through the corridors of Ravenshollow Palace, carrying omens of storms that would go far beyond those caused by nature. Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield had spent sleepless nights since the masked ball, her mind as sharp as a blade, forging increasingly elaborate plans. In her luxurious chambers in the West Wing, decorated with Oriental rugs and French furniture, Evangeline received nightly visits from shadowy figures. One of these visitors was Sir Marcus Pemberton, a skeletal man with rat-like eyes and ink-stained fingers, known in the London underworld for his skills with documents that had never existed. "The letters are ready, Your Grace," he murmured one January night, pulling a sealed envelope from inside his ragged coat. "They look like they came directly from Paris, with all the proper seals and markings." Evangeline examined the work with a connoisseur's eye. The paper was artificially aged, the ink faded in the right spots, the handwriting a perfect imitation of revolutionary French script. The letters suggested correspondence between Catherine and exiled Jacobins, insinuating a conspiracy to overthrow the English monarchy. "And the romance with the revolutionary?" Evangeline asked, her lips curling into a cold smile. "Documented with ardent love letters," Pemberton replied, proud of his work. "A certain Henri Dubois, supposedly executed in France for treason, but who allegedly maintained a secret romance with our dear Catherine before his death." Evangeline felt a shiver of satisfaction run down her spine. The beauty of the plan was in its simplicity. The letters would be discovered in Catherine's chambers, suggesting that she maintained treasonous correspondence even while living in the palace. The paranoia about the French Revolution was still strong among the English aristocracy, and any suspicion of Jacobin sympathies would be enough to destroy a reputation. "When will we plant them?" she asked. "During Lady Somerset's next soirée. All the servants will be busy and her chambers will be empty." While the conspiracy was being hatched in the shadows, Catherine lived her days in a routine that was beginning to acquire a comforting rhythm. Her mornings were dedicated to lessons with Princess Victoria. They studied history, geography, and languages together, creating a bond that grew day by day. Victoria was an extraordinarily intelligent and perceptive child. During their walks through the winter gardens, she asked questions that often surprised Catherine with their depth. "Catherine," she said one afternoon while watching the gardeners prepare the ground for spring planting, "why don't the people at court like you?" Catherine paused in her walk, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, little one, people are afraid of change. I represent something different from what they are used to." "But Daddy likes you," Victoria stated with the conviction of childhood. "I see how he looks at you during dinner." Catherine's heart quickened. It was true that in recent months she had noticed that William's glances lasted a little longer when he thought no one was watching. During formal meals, he often steered conversations to topics in which Catherine could participate, and her opinions on kingdom matters were now regularly requested. "Your father is a kind man," Catherine replied diplomatically. "He smiles more now," Victoria observed, "since you came." Mama would be happy to know that. The child's words touched Catherine deeply. She had developed a genuine affection for Victoria, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. How could she, a simple lady-in-waiting, fill the place of the beloved Queen Charlotte? It was during these moments of doubt that Catherine took refuge in the palace library, a sanctuary of knowledge where the walls were covered from floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. She read voraciously about history, politics, and administration, determined to educate herself for the responsibilities that awaited her. It was on one of those study afternoons that she found William perusing a book on modern agriculture. "Do you also take refuge here when you need to think?" he asked, approaching the table where Catherine had spread out several volumes on economics. "I'm trying to learn," she replied simply. "If I'm going to be queen, I need to understand how a kingdom works." William sat in the armchair beside her, and Catherine felt the air charged with a different intimacy. They were alone, away from the court's eyes, just a man and a woman sharing knowledge. "You don't have to carry all this weight alone," he said softly. "Neither do I. But you were born for this," Catherine countered. I still wake up some mornings forgetting where I am." William laughed softly, a rich sound that Catherine had learned to appreciate. "You'd be surprised how many mornings I wake up wishing I were anywhere else." They talked until the candles began to burn low, about books, about the kingdom, about dreams and fears. It was the longest and most personal conversation they had ever had, and Catherine felt something solidifying between them, not just attraction, but mutual understanding. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, shadowy figures were moving through the palace corridors, planting seeds of destruction that would soon grow like poisonous weeds. When Catherine returned to her chambers that night, a strange sensation followed her. She couldn't identify what it was, but something seemed different, as if someone had moved her things, even though everything seemed to be in its place. She didn't know that her life was about to be shaken to its foundations. The March night arrived wrapped in furious winds that lashed the windows of Ravenshollow Palace like spectral fingers demanding entry. It was one of those storms that seemed to carry omens, where nature itself reflected the turbulence of human hearts. Lady Somerset's soiree had begun like any other court event, polite conversations about trifles, chamber music echoing softly through the halls, and the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. Catherine, wearing a sea-green silk dress that enhanced her eyes, tried to participate in the conversations, but felt a growing weight in the air, as if an emotional storm were approaching along with the physical one. It was during the performance of a young violinist that the first stone was thrown. Lady Cornelia of Blackthorn, her fan of black feathers fluttering nervously, approached Catherine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My dear Catherine," her voice was as sweet as poisoned honey, "how interesting to learn of your continental connections." Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. "I don't understand." "Oh, surely you must remember your French friends," Lady Cornelia continued, as several other ladies approached like vultures sniffing carrion. "They say some very revealing letters were found." Catherine's blood ran cold. "What letters?" Duchess Evangeline materialized beside them like an elegant shadow, her eyes gleaming with thinly veiled triumph. "My dear child, you don't need to pretend with us. We all know about your correspondence with the Jacobins." "I would never," Catherine began, but her voice failed as she realized that all conversations in the hall had ceased. All eyes were on her, and on their faces she saw a mixture of shock, disappointment, and something worse: suspicion. "Is it true you corresponded with a French revolutionary?" Lady Margaret's sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "A certain Henri Dubois?" Catherine felt the world spinning around her. Henri Dubois was a name she had never heard, but the way all the ladies were watching her, as if she were a confirmed traitor, made her legs tremble. "And what about your Republican sentiments?" insisted Lady Elizabeth, her eyes shining with cruel curiosity. "It must be difficult to maintain this facade of loyalty when your heart is with the revolutionaries." That is a lie," Catherine managed to exclaim, but her voice came out weak, desperate. "A lie," Evangeline repeated, feigning surprise. "But the letters are in your own handwriting, my dear. Or are you suggesting that someone forged them?" The sarcasm in the Duchess's voice was unmistakable. Catherine looked around the hall and saw only hostile faces and accusatory looks. Even some who had previously shown her basic courtesy now watched her, as if she were a dangerous viper. Unable to bear it any longer, Catherine ran. She passed surprised servants, ran through marble corridors that echoed with her hurried footsteps, and finally emerged into the winter gardens where the storm raged in all its fury. The snow fell heavy and slanted, lashed by the wind that howled among the bare trees. Catherine ran through the garden aimlessly, her heavy skirts dragging in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could even fall. She found refuge in the crystal pavilion in the center of the garden, a delicate structure of wrought iron and glass that her late mother-in-law had built to cultivate exotic orchids. Inside, the air was scented with the sweet aroma of tropical flowers, a surreal contrast to the icy fury outside. Catherine collapsed onto a marble bench, sobbing uncontrollably. Her whole life had changed in a matter of minutes. How could she have been so naive as to believe she could truly belong in that world? How could she have imagined they would accept her? It was then that she heard hurried footsteps in the snow. The pavilion door opened, bringing a gust of icy wind, along with a familiar figure. William entered, his dark hair disheveled by the storm, his formal coat soaked with snow. His eyes swept the space until they found her, and Catherine saw in them a mixture of concern and something deeper. "Catherine," he said softly, approaching slowly as if she were a wounded animal that might flee at any moment. "Your Majesty, she began, trying to stand and curtsy, but he stopped her with a gesture. "No," he said firmly. "Not here. Not now." He sat down beside her on the bench, and for the first time since they had met, there were no protocols between them, just a man and a woman, alone in a storm. "The letters," Catherine began, but her voice was choked with emotion. "They are forgeries," William said with absolute conviction. "I know they are fake." Catherine looked up at him, her eyes wet with tears. "How can you be so sure?" William was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her face in the soft light that filtered through the pavilion glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, intimate. "Because I have watched you for months. I've seen how you treat Victoria, how you care for the peasants, how you study tirelessly to be a better queen. I've seen the kindness in your eyes, the gentleness in your gestures, and a person like that does not conspire against the kingdom they have promised to serve." His words fell upon Catherine like a balm, but she still trembled. "They will never believe me. The court, the nobility, they have already decided I am guilty." "Then we will change their minds," William said, his voice filled with determination. "Together." Catherine felt something warm in her chest. "Together?" William turned to face her completely, and Catherine saw an intensity in his eyes that made her heart race. "Catherine, I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." The air between them became charged with anticipation. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the pavilion there was only the sound of their intertwined breaths. "What Victoria saw in you on that first day," William continued, his hand moving to gently touch her face. "I see it too. More than that, I feel it." Catherine held her breath as his fingers delicately traced her cheek, wiping away a tear that was yet to fall. She whispered, his name sounding strange and intimate on her lips. "I have fallen in love with you," he said simply, the words carrying a truth he had kept for months. "Not with the fiancé my daughter chose, not for political convenience, but with you, with the woman you are." Catherine's world stopped. For a moment, not even the storm existed. There were just the two of them, the confession suspended in the air like a prayer. "I have too," she began, but the words were lost when William leaned in and touched her lips with his. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant as if he were asking permission, but when Catherine responded, leaning into him, the kiss deepened, charged with months of repressed tension, exchanged glances, and carefully guarded feelings. When they finally separated, Catherine felt as if she could face any storm, both the one raging outside and the ones that awaited her in the palace. "We will discover the truth about these letters," William promised, his fingers intertwined with hers. "And when we do, everyone will know that Catherine Hartwell is exactly the Queen Baelsma needs." As they walked back to the palace together, through the storm that was beginning to abate, neither of them knew that shadowy figures were watching them from the upper windows, and that the real storm was just beginning. The days following the storm brought a deceptive calm to Ravenshollow Palace. On the surface, life continued with its usual routine: formal dinners, council meetings, morning walks through the gardens that were beginning to awaken from winter hibernation. But beneath this apparent normalcy, subterranean currents of suspicion and investigation flowed like hidden rivers. King William had ordered Lord Thomas Ashford to conduct a discreet investigation into the letters found in Catherine's chambers. What began as a simple check of authenticity soon turned into something much more complex and disturbing. Lord Thomas, with his silver hair and sharp eyes that missed no detail, worked in the shadows with the efficiency of a man who had served the crown for more than 3 decades. His first discoveries were immediately suspicious. The paper of the letters, although artificially aged, contained fibers that did not exist in France at the time mentioned. The ink, despite being faded, showed signs of chemical, not natural, aging. But it was when he began to investigate Catherine's past that the real revelations emerged. Eleanor Hartwell, the woman Catherine knew as her mother, had kept secrets that had weighed on her soul for more than 2 decades. On a misty April morning, Lord Thomas found her in her humble country house on the outskirts of London, where she had lived a life of seclusion since Catherine had left for the palace. Eleanor was a woman of 45, with brown hair where silver threads were beginning to appear, and green eyes identical to Catherine's. Her hands, calloused from work, trembled when Lord Thomas showed her the royal seal. "Lady Eleanor," he said gently, "I need to speak with you about Catherine and about the Duke Alexander of Ashbrook." The name hit Eleanor like a lightning bolt. She paled so much that Lord Thomas feared she would faint right there. How do you know?" she whispered, bringing a hand to her chest. The story that unfolded in the following hours was a tapestry of forbidden love, sacrifice, and lifelong guarded secrets. Eleanor had been a lady-in-waiting to the late Duchess of Ashbrook when she met Duke Alexander, a brilliant, charismatic man, but fatally drawn to the revolutionary ideas sweeping Europe at the turn of the century. Their romance was passionate and forbidden, resulting in the birth of Catherine in 1817. When Alexander's Jacobin sympathies were discovered and he was executed for high treason in 1815, Eleanor was pregnant and terrified. She fled to the countryside, took the surname Hartwell, and raised Catherine in the belief that she was the daughter of a respectable merchant who had died in an epidemic. "I was so afraid," Eleanor confessed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The persecutions of Jacobin sympathizers continued for years after Alexander's execution. If they discovered that Catherine was his daughter, Lord Thomas immediately understood the implications. Catherine was not just a common lady-in-waiting, she was the natural daughter of a duke, which gave her a title by birthright. But more importantly, the discovery perfectly explained how someone could have forged evidence connecting her to French revolutionaries, using her father's real past as the basis for the slander. While these revelations were unfolding in the countryside, at the palace, Catherine was living her days under a cloud of suspicion that seemed to thicken with each hour. The ladies of the court avoided her even more openly, and even the servants seemed hesitant to serve her. It was during these lonely afternoons that Catherine found solace in the company of Princess Victoria. The child, with her keen perception, had noticed the change in the palace's atmosphere and had become even more protective of her future stepmother. "Why does Lady Evangeline always smile when you look sad?" Victoria asked one afternoon as they embroidered together in Catherine's private solar. The question, asked with the devastating innocence of childhood, struck Catherine as a revelation. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't paid enough attention to the patterns of behavior around her. "What do you mean, little one?" "Yesterday, when you dropped your embroidery and your eyes got teary, I saw Lady Evangeline looking in through the door. She was smiling, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was like when I break a toy I don't like and pretend to be sad." Victoria's words planted a seed of suspicion in Catherine's mind. Could it be possible that Evangeline was behind the fake letters? The idea seemed both obvious and unbelievable. Obvious because Evangeline had never hidden her hostility. Unbelievable because the magnitude of the betrayal seemed monstrous. That night, Catherine lay in her canopy bed, but sleep fled her like a frightened bird. The full moon poured its silver light through the crystal windows, creating dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. It was then that she heard it. Low voices in the corridor outside her chambers. Catherine rose silently and approached the door, pressing her ear against the polished wood. "The letters were convincing enough," was a male voice she didn't recognize. "For now," a familiar female voice replied, "Evangeline. But we need more evidence. A love letter, perhaps. Something to prove romantic feelings for the revolutionary. What if they discover they're fake?" "They won't." Evangeline's voice was filled with arrogant confidence. "And even if they are suspicious, we have already planted enough doubt. A queen cannot rule without the absolute trust of her subjects." Catherine felt her blood run cold. Hearing the confirmation of her suspicions was both a relief and a horror. At least now she knew she wasn't going crazy. But the magnitude of the conspiracy against her was terrifying. The next day, when Lord Thomas returned to the palace carrying the truth about Catherine's past, he found William in the stables, preparing for a morning ride he hoped would give him mental clarity. "Your Majesty," Lord Thomas said, his voice filled with urgency, "I need to speak with you immediately, about Catherine, and about much more than we imagined." As the two men headed to the king's private study, Catherine watched from her chamber window, unaware that her life was about to change again, but this time for the better. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit together, and the truth that emerged was more complex and extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The Royal Council Hall had never witnessed an assembly as tense as the one that gathered on the misty morning of May 1840. The dark oak walls, adorned with portraits of ancestral kings, seemed like silent witnesses to a drama that would divide the court between justice and betrayal. Catherine entered the hall with the dignity of a queen, despite the almost imperceptible trembling in her hands. She wore a simple navy blue silk dress, with no jewels other than the engagement ring William had given her, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she held her head high, even knowing that she was walking toward what could be her condemnation. Lord Edmund Blackwood presided over the tribunal, his glasses reflecting the candlelight as he organized the documents before him. To his right, the members of the Royal Council were lined up like crows on a branch, grave faces, inscrutable eyes. To the left, a space had been reserved for the evidence that would seal Catherine's fate. Duchess Evangeline occupied a prominent seat among the ladies of the court, her satisfaction thinly veiled under a mask of feigned concern. She had chosen a burgundy dress that highlighted her pale skin, and her jewels sparkled like small flames in the golden light of the hall. King William was present, but seated in a position that protocol required, as a spectator, not a judge. His eyes, however, never left Catherine's face, conveying a silent strength that she held onto like an anchor in the midst of the storm. "Catherine Hartwell," Lord Blackwood's voice echoed through the hall, "you are being accused of treason against the crown, conspiracy with enemies of the state, and falsification of loyalty. How do you plead?" The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine could hear her own heart beating, the crackle of the candles, the almost imperceptible whisper of the 200 people holding their breath, awaiting her answer. She lifted her chin, her green eyes meeting Lord Blackwood's with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Guilty." A murmur of shock rippled through the hall like a wave. Evangeline could not hide the triumphant smile that shone on her lips for an instant. William straightened in his chair, his eyes wide with surprise and horror. "Guilty," Catherine repeated, her voice gaining strength, "of loving this kingdom more than my own life. Guilty of dedicating every day to learning how to better serve the people of Balesmer. Guilty of loving His Majesty and Princess Victoria with all my heart." Her declaration reverberated through the hall like silent thunder. Lord Blackwood adjusted his glasses, clearly not expecting this answer. "And what about the letters found in your chambers?" he insisted. "I don't know how they got there," Catherine replied with devastating simplicity. "I have never corresponded with French revolutionaries. I have never met anyone named Henri Dubois, and I have never conspired against this kingdom or its monarchy." "But the letters are in your handwriting," interjected Sir Marcus Pemberton, the skeletal man who had helped Evangeline with the forgery. Catherine turned to face him. "If they are in my handwriting, then someone forged them, and with enough skill to deceive less trained eyes." It was at that moment that a clear and determined voice cut through the air of the hall. "I saw who put the letters there." All eyes turned to the entrance of the hall, where Princess Victoria walked with firm steps, her white lace dress contrasting with the seriousness of her expression. At 8 years old, she looked much older as she crossed the hall to stand before the tribunal. "Princess Victoria," Lord Blackwood said, clearly uncomfortable, "this is no place for a child." "It is a place for a witness," Victoria retorted, with an authority that made several councillors swallow hard. "And I saw everything." Evangeline paled dramatically. "Child, you must be confused." "I am not confused," Victoria declared, turning to face Evangeline with eyes that shone with determination. "On the night of Lady Somerset's soirée, I followed you to Catherine's chambers. I saw when you opened the desk drawer and put the letters there, and then I saw when you burned other papers in the fireplace." The silence in the hall was deafening. Evangeline tried to maintain her composure, but her mask of innocence was crumbling. This is absurd," she stammered. "Why would a child be wandering the corridors at night?" "Because I couldn't sleep thinking about how sad Catherine was," Victoria replied simply. "And when I saw you doing secret things, I knew you were hurting her." At that moment, Lord Thomas Ashford stood up, carrying a folder of documents that made Evangeline instinctively recoil. "Your Majesty, if I may," he said, addressing William, "I have evidence that sheds an entirely new light on this situation." William motioned for him to continue, his eyes shining with a hope he barely dared to feel. "First," Lord Thomas said, pulling out the forged letters. "These letters were submitted for analysis. The paper contains American cotton fibers that did not exist in France at the time mentioned. The ink shows signs of chemical, not natural, aging, and the handwriting, though skillfully imitated, shows microscopic inconsistencies that reveal its false nature." Murmurs of surprise echoed through the hall. Evangeline clenched her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Second," Lord Thomas continued, "investigations into Catherine's past have revealed extraordinary information that perfectly explains how someone could have forged evidence connecting her to French revolutionaries." He paused dramatically, his eyes sweeping the hall before continuing. "Catherine Hartwell is not who we thought she was. She is Catherine of Ashbrook, the natural daughter of the late Duke Alexander of Ashbrook." The effect of his words was as if a bomb had exploded in the center of the hall. Gasps of shock echoed from all sides. Catherine felt the world spin around her. Her whole life, her whole identity, was revealed to be different from what she had always believed. "Duke Alexander was executed for treason in 1815, Lord Thomas explained, but not before having a romance with Eleanor Hartwell, then a lady-in-waiting to his wife. Eleanor fled when Alexander was arrested, took the surname Hartwell, and raised Catherine by hiding her true lineage to protect her from the political persecutions that followed." William rose slowly, the revelation hitting him with full force. Catherine was not just the woman he had fallen in love with. She was noble by birthright, the daughter of a duke, even if natural. "Third," Lord Thomas said, his voice now filled with authority, "we have evidence that Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield hired forgers to create these letters, using Catherine's father's real past as the basis for the slander." He pulled documents from the folder. Payments made to Sir Marcus Pemberton, a known London forger. Correspondence between them planning the destruction of Catherine's reputation, and witnesses who saw them together on multiple occasions. Evangeline stood up abruptly, her composure finally crumbling completely. This is a conspiracy. You can't prove anything." "We can," Lord Thomas said calmly. "And we have." The trial was virtually over. The truth had been revealed in all its complexity. Catherine was innocent, noble by birth, and the victim of an elaborate conspiracy by a woman blinded by ambition and jealousy. But the most important moment was yet to come, when William would finally fully understand that the woman he had chosen to love was exactly who he had always known she was. It didn't matter her birth or titles, but the goodness of her heart and the strength of her character. The afternoon sun poured its golden rays through the large windows of the council hall, turning the dust particles into small dancing constellations that seemed to celebrate the revelation of the truth. The silence that followed the evidence presented by Lord Thomas was as thick as velvet, charged with tension and anticipation. Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield remained standing, her trembling hands clutching the back of the chair like a woman on the edge of a precipice. Her cold beauty had turned into something almost grotesque under the weight of her exposed guilt, and her dark eyes darted around the hall like those of a cornered animal. Lord Edmund Blackwood adjusted his glasses, his solemn voice echoing through the oak walls. "Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield, Sir Marcus Pemberton, and your accomplices, you are being accused of conspiracy against the crown, falsification of documents, defamation of character, and attempted subversion of the royal succession. How do you plead?" Evangeline tried one last desperate card. "Your Majesty," she addressed William directly, her voice choked with a feigned vulnerability, "surely you understand that a woman would do anything for love. My feelings for your Majesty." Silence. The word cut through the air like a sharp blade. King William had risen, and on his face was an expression of royal authority that made even the most veteran councillors straighten their backs. His eyes, normally gentle, blazed with an icy fury that few had ever witnessed. "Duchess," he continued, his voice low but filled with power, "you conspired against the woman I chose, against the mother my daughter chose, against the future queen this kingdom needs. You did not act out of love, you acted out of ambition, jealousy and malice." Evangeline recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Beside her, Sir Marcus Pemberton had turned so pale that he looked like a ghost of himself. William walked slowly until he was in front of Catherine, who remained seated with the dignity of a queen, despite the tears that glistened in her green eyes. He held out his hand to her, and when Catherine took it, it was as if an electrical circuit was completed between them. "Catherine of Ashbrook," he said, his voice now soft but filled with emotion, "daughter of Duke Alexander, woman of unparalleled courage and kindness. Will you forgive me for allowing you to suffer this injustice?" Catherine rose gracefully, her fingers intertwined with his. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear despite her emotion, "there is nothing to forgive. The truth always emerges, and love always prevails." William smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made several court ladies sigh involuntarily. Then, to the utter astonishment of everyone present, he knelt before her. "Catherine of Ashbrook," his voice echoed through the hall, "before God, before my court, and before my kingdom, I declare my love for you, not for the title you have just discovered, not for political convenience, but for the extraordinary woman you are. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife and queen?" The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine looked down at the man who had knelt before her, not just her king, but the man who had believed in her when no one else did, who had defended her innocence even when the evidence seemed against her. "Yes," she whispered, then more loudly, "Yes, William, with all my heart." The hall erupted in applause. Even the most conservative councillors were caught up in the emotion of the moment. Princess Victoria ran to hug them both, her tears of happiness mixing with Catherine's. But justice still had to be served. Lord Blackwood stood up, his voice cutting through the celebration. "Duchess Evangeline of Thornfield, Sir Marcus Pemberton, and James Morton, the corrupt secretary who facilitated access to the royal chambers, you are found guilty of lesser treason. The sentence is perpetual exile to the American colonies, with immediate departure and prohibition of return to English soil under penalty of death." Evangeline collapsed into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Her entire life of privilege, her status, her ambitions, all destroyed by her own greed and jealousy. Royal guards were already waiting to escort her, but before they could approach, Catherine stepped forward. "Duchess," she said, her voice filled with a dignity that made Evangeline look up, "I am sorry it came to this. You are an intelligent and capable woman. If you had chosen to use those talents for the good of the kingdom instead of for destruction." Evangeline stared at her for a long moment, and for an instant, something like regret shone in her eyes. You really would have forgiven me?" "Forgiveness is already given," Catherine replied simply. "What you do with it now is your choice." It was a demonstration of grace that left the entire hall in respectful silence. Even in victory, even after months of humiliation and suffering, Catherine chose compassion over revenge. As Evangeline was led out of the hall, William took Catherine's hands in his and addressed the assembly. "Nobles of Bailsma," his voice resonated with royal authority, "today we have witnessed not only the revelation of the truth, but the character of the woman who will be our queen. Catherine of Ashbrook has shown us that true nobility is not in the blood, but in the heart. That true strength is not in revenge, but in forgiveness, and that true love knows no barriers of birth or position." He paused, his eyes sweeping the assembly. "As of today, I inaugurate a new era in Bailsma, an era where merit will be valued as much as birth, where compassion will be as important as tradition, where the hearts of our subjects will be as precious as our titles." The applause that followed echoed through the palace walls and beyond, carried by the spring winds to every corner of the kingdom. It was the sound of hope, of renewal, of love triumphing over petty ambition. Catherine looked around the hall, at the faces that now watched her with respect and admiration, at Victoria, who hugged her with unconditional love, at William, who looked at her as if she were the answer to all his prayers. For the first time since she had arrived at Ravenshollow Palace, Catherine truly felt at home. The summer of 1840 arrived in the kingdom of Bailsma like a symphony of colours and scents that seemed to celebrate in advance the union that was approaching. St. Michael's Cathedral, majestic with its Gothic spires reaching for the sky, had been prepared to host the wedding of the century, a ceremony that would be remembered for generations as the moment when love triumphed over convention. In the gardens of Ravenshollow Palace, the white roses that Charlotte had planted years before bloomed in profusion, as if the late queen was blessing her beloved's union with a woman worthy of taking her place. The soft scent of the flowers, mixed with the aroma of lavender and rosemary that emanated from the carefully arranged flower beds, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that enchanted all visitors. Catherine spent her final days as a fiancée In the chambers, she would soon leave to occupy the royal apartments. The wedding dress, a masterpiece of ivory-colored satin embroidered with gold threads forming designs of violets and roses, was suspended in her closet like a materialized promise. The long sleeves were delicately fitted, the waist marked by a golden silk sash, and the train extended for meters of fabric that would whisper like music against the cathedral's marble floor. Victoria had appointed herself the official supervisor of the preparations, running through the corridors with an enchanting authority for an 8-year-old. She coordinated the floral arrangements, approved the decorations, and made sure every detail was perfect for what she called the most important day of Catherine's life. The white violets must go on the main altar, she instructed the florists, her small hands gesturing with precision, because they are the flowers I gave Catherine the day I chose her. And Mama's white roses must form the path she will walk to Daddy. William watched the preparations with a smile he couldn't hide, even during the most serious council meetings. His eyes shone with a light that the courtiers hadn't seen in years, since before Charlotte's death. It was as if Catherine had given him back not only the ability to love, but the ability to dream of the future. During the nights leading up to the wedding, he often walked through the moonlit gardens, remembering the crystal pavilion where he had confessed his love during the storm. That moment seemed simultaneously yesterday and an eternity ago. So much had changed since then. The night before the wedding brought a tradition Catherine was not familiar with. Lady Margaret of Somerset, who had become an unexpected ally after the truth was revealed, came to her chambers carrying a blue velvet box. "It's a royal tradition," she explained, sitting beside Catherine in front of the crackling fireplace, "that the bride receive something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue." The box contained a diamond necklace that had belonged to the first Queen of Balesmer, something old. The pearl earrings were a gift from William, something new. The lace veil was borrowed from the Somerset family, worn by 5 generations of brides. And a small sapphire, discreetly sewn into the lining of the dress, represented something blue. "But there is one more tradition," Lady Margaret said with a mysterious smile, pulling out a sealed envelope. A letter from the late Queen to her successor. Catherine received the envelope with trembling hands. Charlotte's elegant handwriting was still perfectly preserved, and the words she read were like a warm hug from a woman she had never known, but who had left a legacy of love and wisdom. "To the woman who brought light back to my beloved's eyes and joy back to my daughter's heart, you were chosen not by destiny but by love. Rule with compassion, love without reservations, and always remember that to be a queen is to serve, not to be served. May God bless you and protect you all the days of your life, Charlotte." The tears Catherine shed as she read were tears of gratitude and determination. She understood at that moment that she was not just replacing Charlotte. She was continuing a legacy of love and dedication that the Queen had established. The wedding day dawned with a cloudless blue sky, as if the weather itself had conspired to make the occasion perfect. The bells of all the churches in the kingdom rang in unison from sunrise, announcing the sacred day. St. Michael's Cathedral was filled with representatives from all over the European nobility. Kings, queens, dukes, and ambassadors had travelled from afar to witness not just a royal wedding, but what many considered a new model of monarchy, where love and merit could triumph over political convenience. Catherine arrived at the cathedral in a golden carriage, pulled by 6 white horses, the streets lined with subjects who threw rose petals and shouted blessings. Her dress shone in the sun as if it were woven with light, and the ancestral lace veil floated around her like an ethereal cloud. When she entered the cathedral, accompanied by Victoria as her maid of honor, the respectful silence was broken only by the soft sound of the organ playing a melody that Charlotte had chosen for her own wedding decades earlier. William awaited at the altar, magnificent in his navy blue military uniform with golden decorations, but it was his eyes that stole all the attention. Eyes that shone with love, promise, and gratitude as he watched Catherine walk toward him. The Archbishop of Canterbury conducted the ceremony with a solemnity that echoed through the cathedral's Gothic arches. The traditional words took on renewed meaning when spoken by 2 hearts that truly felt them. "William, do you accept Catherine as your wife, to love her and honor her, in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, all the days of your life?" "I do." His voice resonated clear and firm, filled with absolute conviction. "Catherine, do you accept William as your husband, to love him and honor him in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, "All the days of your life? I do," she replied, her voice soft but audible throughout the cathedral. When they exchanged rings, golden circles engraved with their intertwined initials, both their hands trembled slightly with the emotion of the moment. And when the Archbishop finally pronounced the words, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," and William lifted Catherine's veil to kiss her, the love that shone between them was so palpable that many of those present felt tears welling in their eyes. The kiss was soft, reverent, and filled with promises for a lifetime together. And when they finally separated, Catherine and William turned to face their kingdom as king and queen, united not only by law, but by true love. The cathedral bells rang in celebration, echoing throughout the kingdom as a proclamation that a new era had begun, an era where the heart would be as important as the crown, where kindness would be as valuable as gold, and where love would prove once again that it can conquer any obstacle. The autumn of 1840 painted the kingdom of Baelsma with golden and crimson hues that seemed to reflect the growing prosperity spreading across the lands under the reign of William and Catherine. The first months as queen had brought Catherine challenges she had never imagined, but also joys that surpassed her most optimistic dreams. The royal apartments, which for years had echoed with the melancholy of William's grief, now vibrated with the renewed energy of a true love. Catherine had carefully preserved Charlotte's memories. Her portraits remained in places of honor. Her rose gardens were maintained exactly as she had created them, but she had also added her own personal touch. Books on agriculture and economics on the shelves, correspondence with European leaders on social issues, and a desk always filled with projects to improve the lives of less privileged subjects. Victoria had blossomed with Catherine's constant presence, growing into an extraordinarily articulate and compassionate young woman. During their morning lessons, she often surprised her new mother with observations that revealed a deep understanding of the world around her. "Catherine," she said one morning while studying a map of Europe, "why do some countries have very rich kings and very poor people, while others manage to balance it better?" It was exactly the kind of question Catherine had learned to expect from the child, questions that went straight to the heart of complex issues that many adults preferred to avoid. "It's a matter of how resources are distributed," Catherine explained, moving her chair closer to Victoria's. "Some countries concentrate all the wealth in the hands of a few, while others invest in the education and well-being of all their subjects. And us? How is Baelsma doing?" Catherine smiled, pointing to the reports she had been studying before the lesson. "We are improving. Your father has approved the construction of 5 new schools in the rural provinces, and the farmer assistance programs are already showing results in the harvests." Indeed, the projects Catherine had proposed during her first months as queen were beginning to yield tangible results. The direct trade routes with the northern valleys, suggested by her during that memorable council meeting, had become a model of efficiency that other kingdoms were beginning to copy. Grain prices were stabilized, peasant revolts had ceased, and a genuine prosperity was beginning to spread across the lands of Baelsma. William watched the transformations with growing admiration. During council meetings, he often asked for Catherine's opinion on complex issues, and her suggestions invariably revealed an intuitive understanding of the people's needs that impressed even the most veteran councillors. "The Queen has a unique perspective," commented Lord Thomas Ashford one afternoon, after Catherine had proposed a system of travelling libraries to bring education to the most remote villages. "She sees the kingdom through the eyes of someone who has lived in both worlds, the nobility and the common people." It was a perceptive observation. Catherine's experience as a lady-in-waiting, far from being a disadvantage, had proven to be an invaluable advantage. She understood the needs and concerns of the common people in a way that few members of the royalty could match. Letters arriving from other European kingdoms confirmed that Baelsma's reputation was changing. Queen Victoria of England had written personally to congratulate Catherine on her admirable social innovations, while King Louis-Philippe of France had requested detailed information about the agricultural assistance programs. But perhaps the biggest change was the most subtle. The atmosphere of the palace itself had been transformed. The corridors that once echoed with whispers of conspiracy now buzzed with animated conversations about projects and improvements. The servants worked with renewed enthusiasm, knowing they served a queen who genuinely cared about their well-being. The visits of foreign dignitaries, which had once been formal and rigid events, became occasions of true hospitality and cultural exchange. Catherine had also established a new tradition, weekly audiences, where any subject could present petitions directly to the crown. It was unprecedented in the monarchical tradition, but the results were extraordinary. Issues that once might have taken months to reach the king's knowledge were now resolved in weeks. At one of these audiences, a young widow from the northern lands brought a proposal to use women to teach other women to read and write. "Your Majesty," she said, her calloused hands trembling slightly as she held a small manuscript, "many of us want to learn, but the men of the villages do not take us seriously. If we had female teachers—" Catherine leaned forward, her eyes entirely focused on the woman. "What is your village?" "Thornwick, Your Majesty." "In the Northern Valley." Catherine made a careful note. "I know Thornwick. It is a hard-working community that contributes a lot to our prosperity. The well will be drilled within 2 weeks, and I will also send an engineer to evaluate if we need improvements on the road that connects you to the capital." The gratitude in the peasant woman's eyes was so intense that she could barely murmur thanks before making a deep curtsy and walking away. It was scenes like this that were repeated every week, creating a network of trust and loyalty that made Baelsmer almost unique among European kingdoms. Catherine had kept her promise to serve the people, and the people responded with love and dedication that went far beyond mere obedience. During the evenings when official duties ended, Catherine and William found precious moments of intimacy. They walked through the moonlit gardens, talking about their dreams for the kingdom, sharing hopes and concerns like any couple in love. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Catherine confessed on a moonlit night, as they watched Charlotte's white roses shining like silver ghosts in the garden. "A year ago I was just a lady in waiting. Now you are exactly who you have always been," William interrupted softly, taking her hands in his. "An extraordinary woman with an extraordinary heart. The title of Queen only gave the world permission to see what I have always seen." "And what did you see?" Catherine asked, although she knew the answer. "A queen," he said simply. "Not because my daughter had chosen you, not because you had noble blood, but because you had the heart of a queen. The wisdom, the compassion, the strength to put the needs of others before your own." Catherine looked up at him, and in William's eyes she saw the same adoration she had discovered on that stormy night 12 years before. "We did it, didn't we?" she whispered. "We created the kingdom we dreamed of. We created a family," William corrected. "The kingdom simply followed our example." It was a profoundly true observation. The love they had built, with each other, with Victoria, with their children, had radiated throughout Baelsmer, creating a culture of mutual care and shared progress that had not only transformed a kingdom, but offered a model for the world. As they walked back to the palace under the bright stars, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led her from a lady-in-waiting to a queen, from an orphan to the matriarch of a dynasty that promised to guide Baelsmer to an even brighter future. Victoria had become a remarkable young woman who used her position to advocate for progressive social changes. Henry showed signs of becoming a wise and compassionate leader. Margaret and James were growing up surrounded by love and solid values, and the kingdom itself flourished like a well-tended garden where every subject had the opportunity to blossom. The dream of a better life, which had begun with a child offering white violets to a stranger, had materialized into a reality that surpassed even Catherine's most optimistic hopes. As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine looked out the window at the moonlit gardens and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the challenges that strengthened her, for the people she loved, and for the kingdom they had built together. The kingdom of Baelsmer had truly been reborn, not through conquests or riches, but through the transformative power of love, compassion, and hope. And in their hearts, Catherine and William knew that this was just the beginning of a story, that their children and grandchildren would continue to write, carrying forward the light they had lit together on a stormy night so many years ago. 12 years later, summer of 1852, the gardens of Ravenshollow Palace had never looked more vibrant than on that radiant July morning. Where once there had been only Charlotte's white roses, now entire flower beds of flowers of all imaginable colors bloomed, purple and white violets, golden lilies, fragrant lavender, and jasmine that climbed trellises, creating natural arches of beauty and fragrance. Catherine, now 34, walked along the polished stone paths, carrying Margaret, her 2-year-old daughter, while watching her children play under the loving supervision of Victoria. The former little girl had grown into a graceful and intelligent young woman of 20 who had taken on many responsibilities in the kingdom and become a passionate advocate for women's rights. Prince Henry, now 11, had grown tall and strong, with his mother's golden hair and his father's penetrating eyes. At that moment, he was patiently teaching his younger brother, 7-year-old James, how to use a wooden bow that William had had specially made for them. "Remember, James," Henry said with the seriousness of a veteran teacher, "it's not about strength but about focus. Aim with your heart, not just with your eyes." James, a lively boy with brown hair and a mischievous smile that melted hearts, carefully adjusted the position of the bow, following his older brother's instructions. When the arrow, blunt of course, hit near the center of the straw target, he shouted with joy and ran to hug Henry. "Very good, young archers," Catherine said, approaching with Margaret in her arms. "But remember that a prince's true aim should always be justice and kindness." It was the kind of lesson she had learned to teach naturally, to turn every moment into an opportunity for moral and emotional growth. Her children were growing up not just as princes but as compassionate human beings who understood their responsibilities to the kingdom and its people. William watched the scene from his apartment balcony, an administrative report forgotten on the table behind him. At 45, he had acquired some wrinkles around his eyes and silver threads at his temples, but his posture remained regal, and his eyes shone with a deep satisfaction that had not existed in the years before Catherine. The kingdom he contemplated had been dramatically transformed since the wedding. Baelsmer had become a model for other European nations, famous for its social innovations, economic stability, and the well-being of its subjects. The public schools established by Catherine now educated more than 10,000 children. The agricultural assistance programs had virtually eliminated famine, and the traveling library had expanded to include 20 wagons that constantly traveled through the kingdom, bringing knowledge to every corner of the royal lands. "Contemplating your prosperous kingdom, Your Majesty?" asked Lord Thomas Ashford, approaching to join William on the balcony. "Contemplating my family," William corrected with a smile. "The kingdom is just a reflection of the harmony I found at home." It was a profound observation. The personal happiness of William and Catherine had radiated through the entire governmental structure, creating an atmosphere of optimism and cooperation that infected everyone from the royal councillors to the humble farmers in the most distant provinces. "The French ambassadors were impressed with our progress," Lord Thomas commented. "They are considering implementing our educational system in their own lands. And the Prussians want to understand how we managed to maintain political stability without repression," William added. Catherine was right when she said that treating the people with dignity and respect would create stronger loyalty than any military force. Indeed, Catherine's humanitarian approach had become the hallmark of the Baelsmer kingdom. In a Europe often troubled by revolts and political instability, Baelsmer remained serene, not through repression but through policies that truly met the needs of its subjects. That afternoon, as happened every Friday, Catherine conducted her public audiences in the petition hall. The room was full of subjects who had travelled from afar to present their issues directly to the Queen. Catherine, wearing a light blue dress that enhanced her still bright green eyes, sat in a simple but elegant armchair, listening to each story with genuine attention. A young peasant woman approached, carrying a small child and clearly nervous about addressing royalty. "Your Majesty," she said in a trembling voice, "my village needs a new well. The old one has dried up, and we are walking 2 leagues to get water." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes focused entirely on the woman. "What is your village?" "Thornwick, Your Majesty, in the Northern Valley." Catherine made a careful note. "I know Thornwick. It is a hard-working community that contributes greatly to our prosperity. The well will be drilled within 2 weeks, and I will also send an engineer to assess if we need improvements on the road that connects you to the capital." The gratitude in the peasant woman's eyes was so intense that she could barely murmur thanks before making a deep curtsy and walking away. It was scenes like this that were repeated every week, creating a network of trust and loyalty that made Baelsmer almost unique among European kingdoms. Catherine had kept her promise to serve the people, and the people responded with love and dedication that went far beyond mere obedience. That night, when the children were finally asleep and the palace had plunged into the gentle tranquility of the summer night, Catherine and William met in their favorite place, the Crystal Pavilion where so many crucial moments of their lives had unfolded. "Do you remember," William said, pulling her into his arms, "the first time we came here together during the storm?" Catherine smiled, snuggling against his chest. "How could I forget? It was the night you told me you loved me." And you were so sure you didn't deserve that love, William recalled, gently kissing her hair, which now had some silver threads intertwined with the golden brown. If only you could have seen then what I saw. And what did you see? Catherine asked, although she knew the answer. A queen, he said simply. Not because my daughter had chosen you, not because you had noble blood, but because you had the heart of a queen. The wisdom, the compassion, the strength to put the needs of others before your own. Catherine looked up at him, and in William's eyes, she saw the same adoration she had discovered on that stormy night 12 years ago. We did it, didn't we? She whispered. We created the kingdom we dreamed of. We created a family, William corrected. The kingdom simply followed our example. It was a profoundly true observation. The love they had built, with each other, with Victoria, with their children, had radiated throughout Balesma, creating a culture of mutual care and shared progress that had transformed not only a kingdom, but offered a model for the world. As they walked back to the palace under the bright stars, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led her from a lady-in-waiting to a queen, from an orphan to the matriarch of a dynasty that promised to guide Balesma to an even brighter future. Victoria had become a remarkable young woman who used her position to advocate for progressive social changes. Henry showed signs of becoming a wise and compassionate leader. Margaret and James were growing up surrounded by love and solid values, and the kingdom itself flourished like a well-tended garden where every subject had the opportunity to blossom. The dream of a better life, which had begun with a child offering white violets to a stranger, had materialized into a reality that surpassed even Catherine's most optimistic hopes. As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine looked out the window at the moonlit gardens and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the challenges that strengthened her, for the people she loved, and for the kingdom they had built together. The kingdom of Balesma had truly been reborn, not through conquests or riches, but through the transformative power of love, compassion, and hope. And in their hearts, Catherine and William knew that this was just the beginning of a story that their children and grandchildren would continue to write, carrying forward the light they had lit together on a stormy night so many years ago.